All right. Proclamations, presentations, and awards. First up, we have a presentation by Jamison Crosby regarding stormwater regulations update. Jamison, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Okay, I don't normally need a mic, but we'll see how it goes.
That's just so everybody at home can hear you, because
Right.
you're on TV.
Oh, good grief. Okay,
See?
now I'm famous. I don't know if I'm ready for this. So, good evening. My name is Jamison Crosby. I'm the program manager for the Napa Countywide Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. I'm going to talk tonight about stormwater regulation and compliance. I'll try not to put us to sleep here or at home. Stormwater regulations, they're not new, but they're getting a lot more complex and hence a lot more expensive. They're going to be a real draw on your city staff's time, on your budgets, and hence Derek Rayner invited me here this evening to talk to you about what's happening with the regulations and the nexus of what's, in fact, we have a new permit, and that's what's driving this. So, oh, I can advance the next slide. So, first of all, in case you probably haven't heard, what is the Napa Countywide Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program? Well, we're a consortium of county, put that county logo, the county, the flood control district, and all of the other cities and towns within the county. So Yountville, St. Helena, Napa, American Canyon, and of course Calistoga. And this graphic isn't the most beautiful, but it illustrates the point, which is to say that the program, basically consisting of me, is sort of at the center of the wheel. I do kind of the overall stormwater permit coordination and administration, and then all of the individual other cities and towns and the county have their own independent stormwater program that they run themselves. Of course, we information share, we coordinate, we collaborate, we work back and forth across that wheel and around the wheel in every which way. But nevertheless, we kind of operate on kind of a whole countywide level and also an individual city level. We formed in 2003 when the stormwater regulations were first hitting the entities here in the county as a way to be efficient about implementing them and realize some economies of scale rather than having a bunch of small towns and cities try to do these things on their own. The thought was, let's band together and do this together. And that's a model that's used on many other counties, and it seems to work very well. Yes. So again, I sort of alluded to the fact that we have kind of a model of joint implementation here. Some of the requirements are fulfilled by the individual cities and towns, and some are fulfilled by the program, which is me. Some examples for you to maybe bring it home a little bit. Things that you do as a city on your own to implement stormwater regs would be your construction inspections. So when there's a construction project here in town, somebody from the city, probably from Public Works Department, has to go out and ensure that the contractor is installing erosion control BMPs, sediment control BMPs properly so that you're not getting gullying and washouts and sediment into your storm drains.
Just to add, BMPs being?
Best management practices. Thank you. Yeah, I have, unfortunately, a number of acronyms for you. There won't be a test at the end. So that's one example. Another example, say a citizen calls up and they've observed somebody dumping oil or paint or something into a storm drain. They'll call the city, and the city will go out and investigate that and find out what's happening and hopefully put a stop to it. Examples of things that we fulfill on a program-wide level, which is basically by me, are our public education and outreach program. So because each city is required to have a public education program, it would really be kind of duplicative to have each one of them develop their own. They'd all have their own messaging. It might conflict with the other city's messaging, be inefficient. So instead of doing that, we contract for that through the program and hire the Napa Resource Conservation District to do our public education outreach on behalf of all the cities. So other examples of things that I do at the program are our annual reporting. Every year around September, we have to submit a pretty voluminous annual report documenting everything that the cities have done that year. More acronyms. TMDL compliance, that stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. It's basically another water regulatory program. I'm going to be negotiating with the Regional Water Board on that. And so again, it doesn't make sense for each of the cities to go and try and negotiate that on their own. I'll coordinate coordinate that through the program. So if we can step back just a second, the source of all of this is the Clean Water Act. It's a landmark piece of legislation considered, by all accounts, a very successful piece of legislation. It came around in 1972, you know, as a culmination of just growing environmental awareness, but also a couple of really catastrophic environmental events. One of them, I don't know if any of y'all remember this, but the Cuyahoga River fire in Ohio. River and fire are not two words that I put together myself very often, but apparently the river was so choked with oil and debris that a spark ignited it. And the river was on fire, as you can see even from the black and white picture, was on fire for some time, ended up on the cover of Time magazine, and really galvanized people's interest, and people said, okay, something needs to be done. Our water is being polluted, and we need to do something about it. So they passed the Clean Water Act and said, hey, if you want to discharge anything other than clean water into the waters of the United States, you have to have a permit to do it. And it's this so-called NPDES permit, NPDES. I'm not even going to tell you what that means because it really honestly doesn't matter. Just think of it as a stormwater permit. Again, at the beginning, when the Clean Water Act was first enacted, you know, what do you do when you first recognize a problem? You go after the worst part of the problem, the most visible part of the problem. And at that time, the most visible problem were these so-called point sources of pollution, which are discrete places in the landscape where you might have a pipe that's coming out from a manufacturing plant, or a wastewater, a pipe coming from a wastewater treatment plant, where you have a discrete source of pollution coming into the environment. And over time, they got those kind of cleaned up pretty well and said, okay, what's the next issue here? Well, they recognized that actually non-point sources of pollution were really a bigger contributor to the problem than the stuff that was really obvious. So got some non-point source pollution going on tonight. We've got a rain event generating stormwater, and that's one of the best examples of non-point source pollution. And that is to say, it's not something that you can very easily point to and call out, but it's all that water emanating from our impervious surfaces that ends up in storm drains polluted with all manner of contaminants. And as I say, it was amended to include these non-point sources in the late 80s, and you know, you can have stormwater from an industrial source, from a construction source, or a municipal source. And of course, that's our focus tonight, is the municipal program. But there are actually 3 general stormwater permits for industry, construction, and municipal. But tonight, your concern is primarily the municipal. It's not going forward. Can you flip that forward for me, Amanda? Thank you. Yeah, it did. Oh, there you go, right there. Thank you. So what is stormwater? Maybe I'm preaching to the choir here. Y'all know all about this. But as I said, stormwater is basically the precipitation that is, you know, falling on our parking lots, our roofs, our farms, forests, all the pervious and impervious surfaces that we have and create. And the distinction between stormwater and wastewater is that stormwater is completely untreated. So all the water, the rain that's landing in the parking lot and dropping into a storm drain and is then going to the Napa River gets 0 treatment of any kind. So any pollutant that ends up there ends up right in the Napa River. We fish from the river, we swim in the river, and in some cases in the United States, we pull drinking water from rivers. So stormwater is picking up hydrocarbons, metals, PCBs, mercury, pesticides, pet waste, trash, the most incredible, you know, diversity of pollutants, and it's very hard to deal with. The volumes are much higher than wastewater, and you know, the different types of pollutants are much more varied. Oh, good, it's not working now. So, rise of the acronyms. I used kind of a silly horror flick font because the new legislation always leads to a million new acronyms, and it's amazing what you can say with a whole bunch of acronyms and not really, I don't know if you say anything at all. So this first bullet, let me say it with a little tongue-in-cheek here. CWA amended in 1987 to require MS4s to get NPDES permits, install BMPs to the MEP, or face ACLs. Sorry, I had to do it. I had to do it. So again, not to overwhelm you, but these are things, when your city gets into this, you're going to be hearing more and more from Derek and me and others. It's basically saying MS4s, Municipal Separate Stormwater Systems. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, of course. Okay. I knew some of these were going to be pretty familiar. Requires you to get stormwater permits, install best management practices to the maximum extent practical, or face, and this is probably the important one, administrative civil liabilities, which means fines, penalties. The water board can penalize you. If they decide that you are not meeting the requirements of your stormwater permit, they can fine you $10,000 a day and up to $10 per gallon of discharge. And you can imagine stormwater volumes are large, so you can get into some really ugly fines very quickly. If you've heard of this distinction between, a Phase 1 permit or a Phase 2 permit, Napa and all its cities and towns are a Phase 2, which basically just means small. Any jurisdiction of less than 100,000 population is a Phase 2, and that's what we are. And the Clean Water Act, all the regulations in it are administered by the EPA, but in California and many other states, the EPA delegates that authority down to a state agency, and that state agency is called the State and Regional Water Quality Control Board. They are actually our regulator. They're the ones writing the permits, telling us what to do, and deciding whether or not we're really properly doing it. So 7 slides in, and we finally get to the point where the header of this slide can maybe mean something. Small municipal stormwater permit. So again, as I mentioned, I think in the second slide, Calistoga, Napa, all the other cities here got their first stormwater permit in 2003. And that permit has not changed since then. We've been operating under the same permit for basically a decade. We've pretty much got it wired now. And they reissue those permits. Well, they're supposed to do it every 5 years, but they're 5 years behind. But they did, just in February, finally adopt, the State Water Quality Control Board finally adopted a new stormwater permit that will be effective this July. So July 1st, 2013, you're under a whole new set of rules. This is the permit, in case you're, I don't know if this shows anything. I don't know what you think, but it's pretty thick. It's about 2 or 3 times the size of the previous permit. It's longer, it's more prescriptive, and hence it's going to be more expensive to implement. It's going to require more cooperation on your part, both among different departments within your city, also your cooperation with other cities here in the county, regionally, and even statewide. And that's where I can really come into. Derek doesn't need to be sitting in on meetings that people statewide try to figure this stuff out. I'm here to do that and then pass that information on to him and hopefully make his job a little less difficult. So again, you don't need to absorb everything on this slide. This is all the provisions in the permit, just the headers, just the super headings of what is involved. The only point of this is just to show you that everything in orange are completely new. Those provisions are completely new. We're not doing anything about those currently. Those are all new. And even pretty big parts of the sections in white there's a lot of stuff in those provisions that are new as well. So there's, again, a lot of new material here. So what do you have to do? Well, there are a lot of things to do. Your first hurdle is to submit your permit application. It's due July 1st, 2013. It involves doing what's called a notice of intent, and that means you're filing with the state saying, I intend to be covered under this general permit. This is my signal. I want to be included. Okay, whether you want to, that's another matter, but you have to. So, and you submit that by the state's so-called SMART system. We make a lot of jokes about that, whether or not how smart it really is, but it's basically their online database that they try to make this as streamlined as possible for applicants. You will be submitting a guidance document, which is basically a relatively simple planning level document that delineates exactly which departments in your city will be responsible for all the different sections. And it really just kind of forces you to sit down and think about, okay, how are we going to make all this work? Who's going to take primary responsibility? Who's going to call who? And how is all the information going to move around? You are going to have to submit a map, be straightforward, a map of your city boundary area, and a fee. Your stormwater fee, I believe, is $4,010. They have different fees according to the size of the city. For your size, it's $4,000. And all that is due by July. Again, I'm working now on what that guidance document is going to look like, and I'm going to be working with Derek to help him fill that out and help him get everything he needs to submit. So I've been kept talking and alluding about cost. So let's talk about costs. Permit costs in the present. What are you paying for stormwater programs right now? There are two components of that. You have your city's direct cost, which is the cost of your own city staff, Derek, anybody else at Public Works, and any other departments who might be collaborating on stormwater stuff. The cost of any equipment you might use for that, materials and so forth. There's your direct cost, and then there is your share of the overall program cost. So those are the things I mentioned at the beginning that I coordinate on behalf of everybody. Everybody pays a share of that according to your population. So your pro rata share by your population is what percent you pay into that. So your share of the overall program cost for fiscal year 12-13 was $6,103. It's approximately 3.4% of our overall budget. That's your pro rata share. Your population is small, hence your percentage is small. If you actually did the math, it doesn't exactly work out because the flood control district provides a fairly substantial subsidy into the program. So even though our budget was $218,740, I believe that flood control district contributed $40,000 just off the top. So you're really only taking 3.4% of 177,000. So I don't want to get lost in the minutia, but you're paying $6,100 into the joint program. Now, what is your direct cost? We currently estimate they're about $67,000 a year, and that's the cost of, well, previously Bill McBride, before he retired, as I understand, he was the main person responsible for stormwater issues in the city, so it would be anytime he spent on stormwater issues, any other staff that worked with him. There's also the cost of there's a special bin that the water board required you have to, when your street sweepers clean out, you know, the stuff is often wet. When your catch basin's cleaned out, it's wet. It can't just go in a normal garbage dump in a garbage bin. So you pay for that and some permit fees. So your grand total is about $73,000 a year presently. So in the future, well, I think I could have actually put a little genie here with a crystal ball, because cost estimating shouldn't be so darn hard, but it's not an engineering project, unfortunately. There's so much about this permit which is up for interpretation, which is speculative, which is kind of TBD. It will be worked out in conversations between myself and the state regulators and other permittees. It's not an easy task. You can use a lot of different, means and methods, but ultimately, theoretically, the overlap of all those methods, you're going to find that spot where they kind of all overlap, and that's probably where the truth lies. And I've done that exercise by a number of different means, and the numbers have kind of validated each other. So your future cost, again, two components of that. Your share of the overall program cost, we're projecting to increase about 27% in fiscal year 13-14. So year one of the permit is not too bad, 27%. So for you, it amounts to about a $1,600 increase. Okay, we can swallow that. In years 2 to 5, those costs are projected to more than double. Thankfully, actually, the permit is phased so that not every single requirement is due the very first year. Some things are due year 1, year 2, year 3, etc. And the steepest part of the curve is in year 2. That's where we really get hit with a lot of the bigger requirements. So that's where your costs will really go up. And again, your city's direct cost, that is also expected to double. So that is the cost, whether it's to hire additional staff, pull resources from other staff that already exist. It remains to be seen how y'all will do that, but those costs are expected to double as well. So that...
if I might ask,
yes.
So it appears to me, since it's a municipal storm drain system, I can't charge anyone for these costs. I can't hand them on to anyone. Basically, we have to absorb them.
You do, yes. And actually, the only real hope of paying for these, I don't know if you've heard of Proposition 218. It was passed by California voters in like 1996. It basically said that unless you get a vote of 50% of your landowners to increase, you cannot increase fees for stormwater. For water supply and wastewater, those entities are allowed to increase their fees. Of course, they have to go through a public process, and they have to provide all the information to the public and take comment and so forth, but they can increase their fees if it's necessary to cover their costs. Stormwater was specifically prohibited from that. And it's really put cities in a real bind of trying to find a way to pay for this. And of course, we made many vigorous arguments to the state about our inability to pay for these things and the lack of a funding source. And that, hey, this is coming out of general fund. This is a choice between police and fire and stormwater. Help us out here. But they worked with us, but it's still pretty tough. So no, you don't. Unless somebody, I would say, lobby your state assembly people and senators and try to get that overturned. And that's been attempted several times. It hasn't passed, but that's the only way to do it. Any other? I realize
There's not
I didn't
a
get to
slide after this that gives
the slide
good
after
news,
this
or
says questions.
no
Actually,
good news? All right.
it's a rather inauspicious ending there. We kind of just fell off a cliff, but yeah, questions.
Our
Okay.
costs are doubling. What do we get?
You get permit compliance. You get protection from administrative civil liabilities. Yeah.
So,
You
so
get
what
clean
that,
water.
what I understand is that for the initial period, it's basically a lot of testing, data collection that we send in.
For the first year, one of the first requirements we have to do is we have to negotiate with the regional board on, again, I mentioned these total maximum daily loads. Even though the permit has been adopted, there are a few places where the regional board is given discretion to either to do things a little bit their own way. And so we have to negotiate with them about what those requirements will look like. So having not initiated those, I can't even tell you what it will be. But
I can just imagine the day where they're going to say you need to filter your stormwater before you dump it into the river, something to that effect.
well, they actually already do.
Okay.
Treating stormwater is very difficult because of the volumes.
Right.
You know, everybody says, well, why don't you just treat it? Well, because the volumes are many orders of magnitude larger than the volume going to your wastewater treatment plant. So could be hugely expensive. One of the best ways of effectively and cost-effectively treating stormwater is so-called low-impact development, which means sending your stormwater through grassy swales, through bioinfiltration planters, where the water percolates through soil, and soil microbes grab onto those pollutants, hold them, break them down, and keep them from going into water. And that's a big part of this permit. You're already doing that in some places, but the requirements are getting more stringent. The good thing about that, those requirements, they actually do something.
Right.
They do effectively treat stormwater. But
Any other council members with questions? Staff, anything? Good?
Just to kind of add on to that too, a couple of things that we've had to change recently. We had to go out and actually locate all of our outfall locations into the Napa River, identify where those are, map them, and then eventually we will have to be testing as well and sampling, things like that. So it's going to be more rigorous than anything we've done in the past. And to add on to Jamison's comment, I mean, generally, the first flush storms, the 2-year events and less, the smaller storm events are the ones that, are treated typically on development projects. So you're not, treating like a 10-year event or something like that. So.
Okay.
and yeah, that gets to your question, Richard. There is some testing that's involved. It comes more in year 2 of the permit. As Derek mentioned,
Okay.
one of the requirements, you have to map all of your outfalls into the Napa River. Everywhere a municipal storm drain pipe discharges into the river, you have to, in the summer during the dry season, if it happens to be flowing, you've got to sample it. Then you've got to compare your results with a set of action levels, and if they exceed certain levels, you have to investigate, okay, what is the source of this? Because technically in the summer, there shouldn't be any water coming from your storm drains into a river. So that means if there is water, it's like, well, is it somebody's lawn irrigation? Is somebody washing their car? Is there an illicit connection that we don't know about? So that's some of the testing that's involved.
So I heard a rumor that we can't wash cars in our driveways anymore down the line on this permit.
It's not, I mean, it's never recommended. If you can wash your car at a car wash where they recycle the water and collect the water and don't discharge it, that's better. If you can wash it at your house where it drains to the landscape, to soil or grass, that will filter it, that's better. It's not a great, even biodegradable soaps have impacts,
Right.
So
We have storm drains that have steam come out of them almost year-round from the geyser activity in the area,
Geothermal.
so.
That's a very unique, not many cities have that issue, and that will be, when we do the testing, that'll be one of the things we test for, is to eliminate, if we know it's basically naturally occurring water, and we can demonstrate that, then we won't have to sample it anymore. I have a feeling that will be the explanation for a lot of the water that shows up.
Thank you, Jameson.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming up. While I appreciate the end result of a better environment, cleaner water, all that fun stuff, just for the residents to understand, this is yet again another unfunded state mandate that we as a city are required and have no control over and have to adhere to stay in compliance. Otherwise, the penalties are tenfold worse than the actual fee. And as you heard, there is no way for us to generate or do cost recovery against this. So this is a, quote, cost of doing business that we would otherwise have to swallow if we had no other kind of sources of general fund income. So I'm sure we'll have a few more of these coming down from the state as we move on. Mr. McNay.
Can I ask a quick question?
To the podium, please.
Thank you. Of our guest here. My question is about these average daily loads when they're going to be established in July 1st of this year, correct? What happens if those loads become exceeded? Do you have to explain why? Or
If you can just, sorry, Jamison, again, just into the mic when you respond, just so we can make sure people at home understand.
We're mixing up two things. You're on the right track. The total maximum daily loads have already been established by the Water Board, and they basically are the amount of a pollutant that any water body can kind of assimilate without affecting what's going on there. Those levels have already been determined. What hasn't been determined is what we have to do. What you're referring to, the ones that when we have to sample an outfall, if we find that the levels are exceeded, the city will have to investigate and find out, okay, where is that coming from? So based on the different types of tests or analyses that you can do on the water can help you ferret out, is it a wastewater source? Is it not a wastewater source? Is it, potentially, if it has chlorine in it, then it could be obviously indicative of city. Do you chlorinate your water? You do. So if there's chlorine, it's probably domestic supply. And if it's not any of those things, that naturally occurring water or drinking water, you have to investigate, go upstream, and using your land use maps and other means, try to figure out basically who in the neighborhood is dumping water, and try to get them to stop.
All right, thank you.
It's tricky, very tricky.
Turn in your neighbors, Dennis.
we're going to know where it's coming from. Down from the top of the hill.
Somewhere. All right, next we have a presentation by Mr. Bob Fitteman of the Friends of Pioneer Park on the gazebo project. Mr. Fitteman. If you're coming to ask for money, Bob, we just gave it all to stormwater recovery. So
Thank you, Jamison.
bye,
Bye.
Jameson. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.